This is the public meeting of the City of Brownsville City Commission pursuant to Chapter 551, Title 5, Section 551.041 of the Texas Government Code of the Texas Open Meetings Act. Notice was given that the City Commission of the City of Brownsville would conduct a regular meeting and joint work session with the Planning and Zoning Commission on Tuesday, November 10th, 2020 at 5 p.m. via the WebEx teleconference meeting link provided on the City of Brownsville Agenda Center. This notice and meeting agenda were posted online, and members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting hosted through WebEx could join at the phone numbers listed on the Agenda Center. Members of the public who submitted a public comment form will be permitted to offer public comments as provided by the agenda and as permitted by the presiding officer during the meeting. A recording of the meeting will be made and it will be available to the public in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. It is now 5:02. Let me do a quick roll call. I have the mayor, Commissioner Tetro, Commissioner Gowan, Commissioner Cowan, Commissioner Galansky-Pisania. Commissioner Munguia, have you joined us? Commissioner Neese, have you joined us? Okay. Now, since this is a joint meeting with the Planning and Zoning Commission, we need to let the recording secretary for the Planning and Zoning Commission, Martin Vega, call their meeting to order and have a roll call for them.
Lori, I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't hear my name. I just want to make sure the record reflects I'm here.
I'm sorry, and Jessica Tetro also is present.
Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner.
Okay, Martin, you can call your meeting to order and call your roll.
Good evening, everyone. Notice of a public meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission of the City of Brownsville teleconference open meeting pursuant to Chapter 551, Title 5 of the Texas Government Code, the Texas Open Meetings Act. Notice is hereby given that the Planning and Zoning Commission of the City of Brownsville, Texas, has scheduled a special meeting and joint work session with the City Commission on Tuesday, November 10th, 2020 at 5 p.m. via the WebEx teleconference meeting on the link provided on the Agenda Center. This notice and meeting agenda were posted at the Agenda Center on the city website. The members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting hosted through WebEx teleconference can join at the following numbers. Members of the public who submitted a public comment form will be permitted to offer public comments as provided by the agenda and as permitted by the presiding officer during the meeting. A recording of the meeting will be made available to the public in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. This is reading the attendance or the names of the commissioners. Do I have Mr. Derek Benavides present?
Yes, I'm present.
Do we have Mr. Abraham Galansky present?
I don't think my father was going to make it today.
Okay, do we have Mr. Troy Whittemore present?
Present.
Mr. Aaron Rondon?
Present.
Mr. Ruben Obel?
Present.
Ms. Vanessa Castillo?
Present.
Mr. Ronald Mills? I believe I did see him. All right, thank you. It is 5:05. We call the meeting to order.
All right, it is 5:05 and we are calling our meeting to order. Next up, we will have the invocation. Mr. Brad Burke.
Let's pray. Father God, even with the many challenges we have, we realize that we are so blessed, and we thank you for our many blessings. And Lord God, today we ask you to bring healing to those of us that need it. Bring comfort to those that have lost loved ones, especially during this month where we remember the grief of children. And Lord God, we we lift up our nation to you. We ask you to bring truth and clarity in a way that will draw us to you and therefore unite us in the right direction. Lord, we ask you to destroy all deception and make things crystal clear. Lord, we ask you to cause everybody to be patient during this time and to allow the process to work. Lord, we ask you, especially for this meeting here tonight, to bless our mayor, to bless every city commissioner, to bless the Planning and Zoning Commission. Lord, for the best for the city of Brownsville. Give each one of them the divine direction and leading that they need. We thank you for all of these things in the name of Jesus Christ. And now we'll have a short moment of silence where we can all add our prayers to what has been spoken. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you.
We'll move on to proclamations. Our first proclamation is a proclamation designating November as Children's Grief Awareness Month and Thursday, November 19th, 2020 as Children's Grief Awareness Day. This is for the Children's Bereavement Center of Rio Grande Valley. Mayor, do you or Commissioner Cowan want to read the proclamation?
Commissioner Cowan will be reading that one.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to read the proclamation. It's a proclamation of the City Commission of Brownsville, Texas, designating the month of November as Children's Grief Awareness Month and Thursday, November 19th, 2020 as Children's Grief Awareness Day. Whereas Brownsville, Texas is a community which acknowledges that grieving the death of a loved one is a complex and difficult process, one that affects children deeply. Children often lack the knowledge, experience, or vocabulary needed to express their feelings, ask questions, or cope with such a loss. The impact of unresolved grief on children as they grow and develop leaves families facing tremendous challenges. Whereas Brownsville, Texas is a community which encourages citizens to recognize that children and adults grieve differently and therefore advocate to educate and raise awareness about the needs of grieving children, teens, young adults, and their families by encouraging and supporting honest, age-appropriate conversations around the topics of death and grief. Whereas Brownsville, Texas is a community which chooses to shine a light on compassionate support of children, youth, their caregivers, and families to understand the depth of their grief, stabilize and preserve family relationships, and develop healthy coping skills after the death of a loved one. Whereas Brownsville, Texas acknowledges the mission of the Children's Bereavement Center, Rio Grande Valley, to foster healing for grieving youth, their families, and the community so that no child or family will walk the painful journey of grief alone when faced with the death of a loved one, and supports the campaign for National Children's Grief Awareness during the entire month of November and Children's Grief Awareness Day on November 19th, 2020. And whereas effective child abuse prevention programs succeed because of partnerships among families, social service agencies, schools, religious and civic organizations, law enforcement agencies, and the business community. Now, therefore, we, the members of the City Commission of the City of Brownsville, Texas, by virtue of the authority vested by the Charter of said city, and on behalf of all our citizens, do hereby designate the month of November as Children's Grief Awareness Month and Thursday, November 19th, 2020 as Children's Grief Awareness Day, in accordance with the national movement to bring awareness and support for the grieving children in our community and across our nation. Hence, the past year has been unlike any other and has reminded us of both the fragility of life and the resilience of families as we share in the sorrows of those who have lost a loved one. May the spirit of healing and renewed hope comfort and nurture our children. Let's help them heal. Done on this, the 10th day of November 2020.
Thank you, Commissioner.
believe Julie Harrington with the Children's Bereavement Center was here to make a comment.
Oh, okay. Julie, go ahead. Welcome.
Julie, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome. You just got muted again. There, it's off.
Okay. Okay, we're up. I want to express my gratitude. Commissioner Cohen met me like, it's been almost 2 years now, a year and a half. And we wrote this proclamation. I was behind the gun, submitted it, and then I contacted him saying, through LinkedIn, will you support this proclamation for me? So we are most appreciative to you and the entire commission. We received our proclamation today in the mail, signed by everyone, and we are so grateful. The reason that this Children's Grief Awareness Month is important is, first, let me relate it to all of us. All of us as adults, we have our experiences, which create filters of which we look through life and we live our life through. That leads us to form habits. So 90% of what we do, comes from this inside kind of a subconscious that we maybe are not even always aware of. Now imagine a situation that's most permanent and life-altering, and that's grieving the death of a loved one, which is truly the most brutal form of love. And this type of grief is the most challenging for children because they're more deeply affected because they lack the knowledge, the experience, and the vocabulary needed to ask questions or express their feelings, which can leave them feeling sorrow, isolated, maladaptive behaviors, not performing well in school. And we know that children grieve very differently than adults do. And at our center, we actually work with children as young as 3. If you're old enough to love, you're old enough to grieve. And with Children's Grief Awareness Month, it's important to recognize the differences as children grieve and they go through the different developmental stages of life, so age 3 through 24, so we work with young adults, they're going to process things differently according to that developmental stage. And so, an example with people may not recognize that a small child is grieving because their attention span is short and they may play and then act up and then go back to playing. So you may not realize all that's happening with them because it's happening in short spans. We've had children that have lost a sibling and maybe they were at a very young age when they lost a sibling or a parent. And even though they might have been too young to recognize that at that time, as they go through the developmental stages, it'll affect them at, age 8, age 12, 16, 24, as they go through life and realize that they're missing that person as they look around at the world around them. So Children's Grief Awareness Month is really, we are so grateful for your support. And with all that we have faced with COVID-19, I look at 60% of the people that are calling the center the new intakes, they have been COVID death related. We are at higher capacity than we've ever been. And the busy season of the holidays has not even hit. And that's really when we usually get our most new intakes. And we're booked out as far as new intakes through to the beginning of January. So your support as a community, us understanding the tremendous challenges, number one, the differences between a child grieving and adult grieving, and the challenges faced by those families as they're moving forward. you've touched my heart. Everyone at the center, we are most grateful, and across the nation, an awareness of the children's grieving process. New York Life, who, those insurance companies track this. For Texas, it's estimated that 1 in 16 children is dealing with the death of a loved one in their family. So again, thank you for your support.
Thank you, Julie.
Our next proclamation was to be listed on the agenda was honoring the life of Luis Lucio, VFW post number 2035 commander. That proclamation has been postponed until the November 19th meeting. So we will have a Veterans Day proclamation. Mayor, you want to read that proclamation?
Yes, Lori, thank you. A proclamation of the City Commission of Brownsville, Texas, honoring City of Brownsville employees who are military veterans or active duty and all United States military veterans. Whereas honorable service performed in the defense of our nation is the highest form of citizenship. Whereas our nation's service members, past and present, and their families represent the very best of America, motivated by patriotism and love of country. Our soldiers serve at home and abroad with professionalism, ingenuity, integrity, and devotion. Whereas 112 City of Brownsville employees are veterans or current members of the armed forces. Whereas the willingness of our employees to give freely and unselfishly of themselves in service of our nation is a sacrifice on behalf of our entire city and our nation. Whereas in conjunction with Veterans Day on November 11th, 2020, the City of Brownsville is proud to recognize the men and women in our city, state, and nation who have served to protect our freedom. And whereas with a spirit of gratitude, we honor our employees who are veterans or active duty, and we honor all veterans of the United States Military Forces. Now, therefore, we, the members of the City Commission of the City of Brownsville, Texas, by virtue of the authority vested by the Charter of said city, and on behalf of all of our citizens, do hereby proclaim that all City of Brownsville employees who are veterans or active duty be honored, and that all military veterans be honored. Done on this 10th day of November, 2020, by myself as mayor and the rest of the City Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And we'll move on to our public comment period. We received one public comment form from Jesus Mendoza of 2202 East 28th Street of Mission, Texas. Jesus, you are present, and you may go ahead and speak, and you have 3 minutes.
Mayor, city officials, thank you for the opportunity. I have been homebound for more than 7 years with a life-threatening electro-hypersensitivity EHS, which is caused and aggravated by the same wireless microwave radiation surveillance reaching children at school. I am sleep deprived and in pain all the time. Every day this is a different torture. This is a horrible way to die. Evidence on the federal record proves that my EHS was caused by a retaliatory radiation surveillance which uses directed microwaves and other harmful radiation. My EHS has been recognized by federal and state agencies and by courts as a physical medical condition and as a disability. It is estimated that without knowing, more than 50% of the population is already suffering symptoms of EHS. Children, teachers, doctors, attorneys, and even a director of the World Health Organization are suffering from EHS. See wearetheevidence.org. Despite that EHS is reaching pandemic proportions, most doctors are in the dark or in denial and continue misdiagnosing and mistreating with harmful drugs and with unnecessary invasive procedures, symptoms and signs that disappear by just avoiding or reducing exposure to microwave radiation. On November 2016, the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton admitted in open court that because of my life-threatening electrosensitivity, incarceration is for me a death sentence. And then, in response to counter lawsuits and by default, Paxton admitted that he attempted to enforce by incarceration fraudulent child support orders to conceal with my murder the collusion of the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, with the Hidalgo County Criminal District Attorney Ricardo Rodriguez and others to conceal that a massive Medicaid and Medicare fraud are in use to conceal that the microwave radiation at school is maiming and torturing to death children, teachers, and other defenseless and unsuspecting victims. Furthermore, evidence on the record proves the collusion of Abbott, Paxton, and Rodriguez with federal and state agents, prosecutors, and members of the judiciary on other acts of domestic terrorism, including attempts to conceal that government-sponsored bullying is provoking children, the mentally disabled, and others to commit mass shootings and other acts of terrorism, to justify under fabricated excuses of national security the massive and harmful radiation surveillance of schools and homes, and to conceal that under fabricated excuses of national security, government-sponsored bullying and harmful directed radiation surveillance are being used to maim and torture to death those who denounce government atrocities and other innocent, defenseless, and unsuspecting victims, and even in the privacy of their home, as detailed by the petition to impeach 3 federal judges, by the relevant evidence to the Crucius case, and by the criminal complaint of domestic terrorism against Abbott, Paxton, and Rodriguez, and others, submitted to federal authorities and posted on the case law section of wirelesswatchblog.org, wirelesswatchblog.org. Sharing this information with parents, teachers, doctors, attorneys, judges, and legislators can save millions of lives. Mayor, Commissioners, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Our next item is our work session. As a governmental body, the City Commission will not vote or take any formal action on any items discussed in the work session portion of the agenda. As governmental bodies, the City Commission and Planning and Zoning Commission will not vote or take any formal action. It's a presentation by Freese and Nichols Incorporated of the Uniform Development Code, including zoning and subdivision regulations and their associated supplemental standards, the downtown form-based code, and the adoption of a zoning map.
Who's going to be presenting from Freese and Nichols?
I will be presenting Chance Sparks with Freese and Nichols.
Hey, Chance, welcome.
Hey, good to see you all again. Always happy to be in Brownsville, although I would prefer to be there in person. I'm going to go ahead and do a content share here so we can get rolling. There we go. All right. I believe y'all should be seeing a screen now. Looks like you are. And we will get rolling. So this is a joint workshop to walk you through the Unified Development Code. So we do have a draft document that is currently in the city staff's hands. They've been working feverishly through it to provide comments so that we can ensure that what gets posted, what gets voted on is consistent with the expectations of the city. So tonight we'll be touching on milestones and then walking through those regulations. To understand where we are basically at the end of the road for this. So this was an interesting project. It happened in the midst of COVID. And we, of course, are the first to recognize that in the great scheme of things in Brownsville, responding to a global pandemic certainly outweighs a unified development code. And we recognize that y'all did have a lot of priorities, and we appreciate how much time that the staff has been able to devote to working with us on this. So we're ready to start taking those next steps. One of the unusual benefits of the COVID situation was that we didn't travel to Brownsville as much. I was a little bit sad about that because I loved coming down to the Rio Grande Valley, but it did mean that we could shift some resources. That allowed us to bring in actual revision of the zoning map, which is kind of the critical piece to implementing a development code. That saves usually several months of work on the city side of things, and it's really important because it can help reduce the need for as many rezonings in the future. That means a little bit more predictable development environment, a little less contentious meetings would be the goal of that. This is actually just a quick screenshot of a piece of that, which the city staff is still reviewing to make sure we haven't accidentally designated something incorrectly or that type of thing. Y'all are about 170 square miles of city, so we want to make sure we got everything correct. The adoption process is actually kind of where we are right now. So our next meeting will be on November 19th for a joint hearing, a recommendation and first reading. And then a second reading on December 1st or potentially December 15th if necessary. We have been evaluating, because of the speed of the adoption with this, ways to make sure that this rollout goes smoothly. This includes setting an effective date that is after the adoption date that allows time for process transitions. This is really common in large cities when they adopt a new code. The one that came to mind immediately for us was Tulsa, and also Longview is going through this exact same scenario. And also including a provision that in between the adoption and the effective date, that a applicant could opt into the new code during that time or remain in the previous code, depending on their respective needs. We do emphasize that should be an all or none proposition. It shouldn't be a piece of the old code and a piece of the new code. That tends to create some havoc along the way. We'll come back to this at the end of the presentation, since I'm sure there may be a little bit of discussion on it. And that gets us into the code itself. So the code begins, like many ordinances, with what we affectionately call the boring stuff or the housekeeping provisions. It covers all of the basics of how you read the document itself, legal language, what it's authorized by, how to handle adoption of technical manuals. That's things like your drainage criteria, street criteria, things of that nature. And violations of the code, since not everybody is easygoing and compliant when it comes to these things. So you have to make sure you got that all lined up and done in an appropriate way that has a good due process. The code does establish review bodies. The city commission was, of course, the easiest one. We just simply cross-referenced the city charter. For the others, we have actually imported their what we call their enabling ordinances that address the powers and duties, composition, things like that. The most notable thing out of this is the renaming of the Historic Preservation Commission, and that's simply to align with standard language that we see with the Texas Historical Commission and certified local government programs. It also just simply makes it a little bit easier to say. It was quite a mouthful. With the approval authorities, we set out with several goals in mind. One is to be as clear and streamlined as possible, where anything can be approved legally by staff. Let's go with that. If it can be a border commission in lieu of the city commission, go with that. And then leave the main policy issues, zoning changes and appeals, the state law requirements to the city commission. Also encouraging pre-development meetings and at times requiring them. This is about making sure that every project's process is clearly mapped and all the likely issues are identified up front. That is so important to a developer so they know how long does their option period need to be, what are their pro forma standards. It can even affect how they negotiate a real estate transaction to make certain things an owner responsibility versus buyer responsibility. So within the subdivision review bodies, we, for each of the different types of applications we work with, we create a chart that lays out who does what and when within a process. Who's the decision maker? Who's a recommending body? When is a public hearing required? What type of notice? And importantly, what is the pertinent section of the development code? So that way somebody says, oh, I need to do a amending plat, they see that the city staff is the decision maker and they know that they should go to section 3.2.7 and that tells them all they need to know about getting that done. All of this is hyperlinked so they can literally click the button and it takes them there. That holds true for all of the types of requirements with this. I will point out we do create a preliminary plat process with this. We'll come back to this topic in a little bit, but key thing is that this is very similar to other cities in the Rio Grande Valley and to the rest of the state. We like this from a development perspective because it helps you to get early vesting on a project. That can affect when a developer is able to access their funding from a lender. And it also just gives them the confidence as they go into the next steps of the process. They know it's laid out correctly. There's less rework for the engineer as they do their design and everything like that. We do allow for minor adjustments and major adjustments. And what's really important here is the final plat can then become an administrative process in all circumstances. So that actually speeds up the overall development process. and it also maximizes staff approval ability. So that way, it's a very predictable process. The timeline becomes very certain through that kind of effort. Zoning review bodies, structure much the same. This is much more spelled out in state law as compared to subdivision. But there are some things that we have adjusted here, of course, staff approval maximized. We also have created a site plan provision in this, and it can be applied in a couple of different ways. It can be as an independent permit. For example, if somebody's just wanting to get a site completely shovel ready, where all they need is for the user to pull a building permit. A great example of that might be a commercial center that has some outlots up next to the highway, where they want to go ahead and build out all the parking lot, all of the utility infrastructure, but they don't know what restaurant might want to go there. It's designed for that type of situation. We've adjusted certificates of appropriateness. That's shifted to staff approval, except in certain circumstances. We've also established a planned development district process. It's like a customized zoning district for when you get that project that nobody could have possibly thought of, that needs that subtle nuance and essentially a negotiated custom zoning district. And then, of course, we have multiple relief valves for times where the regulation doesn't quite fit the project, but the project still makes a lot of sense. So those include things like a variance, a zoning special exception, but also alternative compliance, where they can just take a different path to achieve the same goal. Then we have some other review bodies or review actions, building permits, sign permits. This is kind of the potpourri piece of the approvals within this. When we talk about having a pre-development meeting, we think a lot about who is on the development review committee and what are the external public agencies that might be involved. So we actually spell that out in your code. This is not something that is necessarily regulatory, but it lets somebody using the code know, here's who's going to be involved in the decision process and what their roles are going to be. If I have a question about, say, a transportation plan issue, I can speak with the MPO's transportation and mobility planner, things like that. So it just helps clear up that process. Speaking of processes, what we have tried to do is create general processes that will apply pretty much across the board. We try to make these very linear, step by step, so somebody always knows where they are in the process. So what you see here is a 12-step process, but this is why the pre-development meeting is important. For a project, some of these might not be applicable. If they're not having to build infrastructure, for example, those steps will not be included. So it'll be like they'll just skip those and go to the next one. This helps everybody understand where they are in the process, makes it a little bit more predictable, what they need to have done before taking that next step. So in this example, this is like a commercial and multifamily, and then there's a similar one for residential. There's a few subtle differences between the two, but generally follows the same process. Within our application procedures, there's basically subdivision applications, zoning related applications, and construction plan applications. That's kind of your three flavors. And they each have different implications for state law. So you'll see this reference throughout the document to a 30-day review time. And that is a state law provision. We want to make sure that we're clearly stating we are going to comply with state law. We know, however, that your staff has different performance goals, that their expectation is much brisker than this. Our advice is always tailor your code to the state law and then use your internal processes and internal expectations to set that higher standard when it comes to timing. It's one thing that that was very clear to us throughout this process is your staff is very dedicated to this being a speedy process that's predictable and accurate. Again, this is just kind of showing the different types of applications in a different format. Each of these applications has a completeness check. This is really important because you want to make sure that when somebody submits an application, everything is there that you're going to need to determine that they are complying with your code. So basically, it's by spending a few days up front to make sure it's complete. It saves you a ton of time in the review process later, and it makes sure that because something is missing, that you don't end up making a determination about a project that in fact turns out to be inaccurate when you get more information. So same situation. We know that y'all's expectations are that this would be done in a matter of 3 or 4 days versus 14. Within each of the different types of applications, you'll actually find where the approval criteria are and also what action is being taken by the decision-making authority. What are the criteria that are going to be used? How are they going to be applied? What's the process? So it's really clear and easy to find what happens and when. There are some other significant elements within this section. Most of it is geared towards satisfying state law. To demonstrate how we've applied it, to demonstrate that we're avoiding arbitrary and capricious decision making, and creating all the generalized things like how do you do a notice, how do you do a public hearing, and also some key authorizations. For example, we're recommending establish standard uniform submission dates because that allows you to set a calendar where somebody coming into the process, they know if they submit by a certain date, they'll get comments on or before this date, and hopefully a final action on or before this date. That's really important in the development community because that tells them, okay, if I know it's going to take this long, then my option period when I'm purchasing the property should be this much longer. Anytime you can basically think like a developer in your codes, it helps you to ensure a smooth process. That gets us into the subdivision discussion. This is often called it's the boring section. Most people don't focus on it very much, but it's actually where some of the most important things can happen in your code. There will be a huge need for detailed checklists and things like that whenever this is completed. We're really confident that your staff has this under control. Like most of these articles, they will start with general provisions, how it's applicable, when and where. We do a few unique things here in that we reconcile what we're doing in your Unified Development Code with the model subdivision rules. That's important because Brownsville has been a strong user of the Water Development Board's Economically Distressed Areas program. So we want to make sure that there's a clear line between what you're doing and that particular program requirement anytime that you're pursuing grant funding. Again, it establishes different types of plats. We made a few adjustments to this. Y'all used to have a major subdivision final plat and a minor subdivision final plat, and we've tried to align this to match the state law language. So that's what you see here. They're largely accomplishing the same thing, but slightly different language. Again, this is about trying to make sure there's lots of flexibility to do things like adjust lot lines without it causing a lot of headache. Again, we touched on preliminary plats a little bit, and I'd like to explain kind of how this would actually work. So it helps you address consistency with all of your adopted plans and regulations upfront in the process. Things like making sure that your right-of-ways are dedicated all the way through the project, that different pieces of the project are all aligned properly. And also just making sure that you're checking the box on all of your adopted plans. There's a lot of advantages to developers. You can vest earlier. You can break projects into multiple phases. That's really important in commercial work right now. It allows a developer to proceed into designing all the infrastructure construction plans with confidence that their layout is fundamentally sound. That's really important because when you're looking at the design fee for a developer, most of that cost is in those construction plans. So if you can make that a really predictable process, then that gives a developer increased confidence that the amount they budgeted is going to be right. Also, it avoids having rework. You don't have layout changes in the middle of the project that then affect all of the infrastructure. This is only triggered when there's an extension of utility lines or streets. Otherwise, they can just go straight to final plat. It can also run concurrently with a zoning change at the same time. That is sometimes considered a risky proposition for a developer, but if their timing is important, that avenue is available. And then once it's been approved, there is a provision that allows for some minor adjustments that might occur between the preliminary and the final plat. And this is things like a lot line needs to move over 5 feet because of a particular end user's need, that kind of thing. Or when the street was built, it was slightly out of the center line of the right of way, so they need to adjust the right of way. Really little things like that. We also include provisions for how construction happens. This is pretty standard fare. The key thing in Brownsville is the integration of service providers. You have lots of utility service providers. While the PUB is the primary, you have several smaller ones as well. And we're making sure that those get inserted correctly into that process, especially for infrastructure acceptance. We do discuss subdivision design. We address things like double frontage lots, how to address floodplain, block length and width requirements. Those vary a little bit within this based on the zoning. And also having standards for HOAs and property owners associations and private streets. Basically, if somebody's going to do a gated neighborhood with private streets, you want to make sure that they have the financial wherewithal to maintain them long-term in perpetuity. Otherwise, you don't want them coming back to you 20 years from now with crumbling streets saying, city, please help us. You don't want to be in that situation. We do include a connectivity index. So this is really important to helping with not only traffic flow, but how pedestrians and cyclists get from place to place. It establishes some secondary egress standards, cul-de-sac standards, and stub outs for how a development will connect to a future development. This is really important to addressing some of the traffic hotspots in Brownsville, where you have several neighborhoods, but they all channel onto the same roadway. This helps break that up a little bit, and also helps support alternative transportation. Sidewalks, we do provide for those on all sides of the street, and that does include perimeter streets. For example, when somebody builds a subdivision and it backs up to an arterial roadway that doesn't have a sidewalk, they get to build that part of the sidewalk. It addresses ADA compliance, and it sets standards for your different types of sidewalks, whether it's a trail or a regular sidewalk, how it's offset from the curb. And probably really important is it establishes a fee in lieu option. So sidewalks are never a waived provision in this code. It's simply you either build them or you do a fee in lieu. So that way they can be built in a thoughtful way around the area. That's based on how far it is from existing sidewalks. If the city has a planned capital improvements project, for example, if they're about to rebuild a roadway, you don't want them to build the sidewalk right then. You want to take that fee in lieu and then build the sidewalk with the project. And then you might have topographic issues. Those will be generally rare in most cases. You don't have big cliffs and things like that in Brownsville. With streets, we did take a complete streets approach focused on context, and we tried to make these really unique to Brownsville's historic form. Your thoroughfare plan is old. I understand y'all are looking at getting ready to adopt or to start the process of creating a new one. This gets you something to use solidly in the interim, and that's easy to amend once the plan is adopted. Basically, all you do is you just adjust metrics on each of the types, and all you have to do is just adjust the widths in the table. We include conservation corridors. These are areas where low impact development might be more appropriate if there's water quality issues. We include a variety of conventional corridors. Probably what you'll see most commonly is like an avenue as your arterial. And again, we provide for things like, is there a buffered bike lane or a separate bikeway? How wide is the pedestrian space? And that happens on each of these different roadway types. We include some types that are a little bit different that are pulled from what we call the NACTO manual, such as a multi-way boulevard. It's a better way to address access management on your major roadways. We think of like I think it's like Ruben Torres and some of those other really large roadways where this might actually be a good idea for a future configuration. Industrial has its own needs, and as do regular streets. You know, gradually the roadway shrinks down. In each case, we're doing this in a way where it's balancing all the different types of users. This gets really interesting down at the neighborhood level. You start to see, especially in the urban areas, what we call a straza. It's a street / plaza. And this is getting into some of the types that you see, especially in Latin American cities. This is really common, but it's increasingly common throughout the U.S. We also address rural park roads. You do have parks near and within Brownsville where you have a different approach to how you design roadways. We include paseos. A great example of paseo is actually your main plaza area, where you actually converted streets into essentially a walking street for everybody. So we want to memorialize that and provide a way for people to do that in the future. And then, of course, internal drives. We include some greenway designs. These could go alongside or as standalone. So think of this greenway as like your rail trail type frontage, if that helps make a little bit more sense out of it. We also provide for rear alleys, how those should be designed in the future. And then we go from streets into streetscapes. How does the street start to interact with the buildings around it? We established 4 different types of streetscapes, and they correlate to zoning districts and then to different building types within those districts. You have, of course, conventional. This is kind of your normal everyday type of setup. Then you have a mixed use format where you want the wider sidewalks, patio dining, things like that pulled into it. Your normal residential layout and how should that feel and look? How do you place utilities? And then what happens when you're in a multi-way environment where maybe you have a narrow parking sleeve between the street and the buildings? Example of that might be like Palm. And how might that look and feel? We also address access management. This is looking at interconnections between different properties. So that way, if you're going to the business next door, you're not having to go all the way out onto the street and then turn right back in again. It also helps provide a little bit better safety, makes it life a lot easier for pedestrians as well. And again, it varies by the size of the facility. Stacking and sight distance is also a consideration. We want to make sure that if it's a large parking lot, it actually has stacking space within the parking lot so that when people are pulling in, they're not immediately slamming the brakes and causing rear end collisions on the street, things like that. And just making sure there's good visibility. And then lastly, for the standards within subdivision, we look at drainage, including integrating references to LID approaches, which I'll touch on a little bit later. For water, we're maintaining the extension if a development's within 1,000 feet with what we call the to and through provision, making sure that it sets up the next project to also develop simply. And wastewater is 500 feet. These are both very common distances within Texas development. And then we also provide for other underground utility and coordination, just making sure everybody talks is really what that's about. There are relief procedures. There's waivers in subdivision. We don't call them variances. And that's because under state law, the term variance is an inherently zoning related term. We don't want to cross-pollinate zoning issues into subdivision issues. When you do that, it starts to create a lot of confusion about what state law applies. And there's a proportionality appeal. That's a requirement to make sure that if you're taking an exaction out of a development, for example, a right-of-way dedication, that's proportional to the impact they create. This is the same idea as impact fees, but applied to a regulatory circumstance. So that gets us through subdivision and into zoning. Zoning's where this code starts getting much more exciting, much more interesting, much more innovative. You may recall when we started this, we talked about your layer cake approach to zoning. You had 12 use districts, 11 area districts, and 14 overlay districts. When you do the math on that, that's over 1,800 possible combinations. That makes it very difficult for somebody to use a code to understand a map. We have streamlined this. You are now, what we've proposed is 15 base zoning districts with 3 overlays, and those overlays are pretty purposeful. It's your historic overlay, the Resaca's, and the airport. And then we also have established that planned development district. This creates a circumstance where you've got a very predictable regulatory environment, but also very flexible within those. We've also adjusted your nonconformities provisions so that you get, so it encourages reinvestment in the core of your city and achieves some incremental improvement over time. Because you want things to gradually look better. You don't want them to just be locked in time. There's 6 of these zoning districts that are really important, and that's the traditional neighborhood informed districts. We call this our effort to embrace your historic development pattern, or to embrace the DNA of your city as it developed over time. This is all that part of the core of your city where redevelopment has seemed difficult, and you found yourself fighting with suburban standards versus an urban environment. This is seeking to resolve that. There are some key procedures. We've already mentioned the site plan and the certificate of appropriateness. There are certain things that the HPO would be able to administratively approve. And all demolitions have to go to the Historic Preservation Commission unless they're non-contributing. If they are non-contributing in your historic resources survey, those become an administrative approach. That's going to make things run a little bit smoother. There's a lot of actions as far as renovations that the historic preservation officer can approve. And then if that person feels that it's not clearly compliant, they can defer them to the Historic Preservation Commission. And then there's also an appeals process where if somebody doesn't agree with the HPO, they can appeal it to the Preservation Commission. So it makes a little bit smoother process. What you currently call conditional use permits, we're renaming as specific use permits. This is more normal in Texas. Also, we think these are going to become more rare. We have tried to the extent possible for any use that might have had these in the past to establish just additional standards, conditions where we say that you can do this by right as long as you do this other 5 or 6 things. It makes it operate a little bit smoother. And creates a little bit less work for the commission, city commission and planning and zoning. We also provide some graphics for things like how does an actual zoning protest work? This has always been like one of those great mysteries for a lot of people. So we've literally drawn a picture of what does it mean for it to have 20% of the abutters protest. We also provide for a lot of relief in this for some particular types of development. Patio homes and townhomes have got their own special things within this so that they're allowed by right. We also provide for some tools that help encourage urban form to use alleys and build alleys in the future. We provide for appeals, alternative compliance, variances, and special exceptions. And each of those kind of has a different threshold and they're used for different purposes. Again, trying to find as many ways as possible to streamline and provide appropriate flexibility. For each of the zoning districts, they actually have a 1-page tear sheet that tells you everything you need to know about that zoning district. It tells you your lot standards, it tells you setbacks, how accessory buildings are treated, where do you place your parking, building height, and then it tells you where to find the specific standards for things like the permitted uses, building design, parking, all of that. So from this 1 page, a person looking to develop something can actually find all of their answers and all of the appropriate regulations. In fact, you could actually, for each of these zoning districts, you could almost create a little booklet for each that says, oh, you're in this zoning district. Here's everything you need to know. And we do that for each of the districts from residential or from agriculture to residential estate. That's like your large lot type setting. To your R1 district, which will probably be your most common outside of the core, We also create a residential suburban district that drops it down to a 2,000 square foot lot area. And that's because we're talking about things like townhomes and duplexes and things like that, kind of all intermixed. We have a residential transition. This starts introducing multifamily. And then we took a lot of your districts, a lot of your multifamily and some of your commercial districts, and created this two commercial districts: corridor commercial and then regional commercial. So your corridor commercial is going to be probably your most common. You can think of this as like your big roadways that are further out from downtown. And then your regional centers are going to be like the area around Sunrise Mall, some of those things like along the interstate where it's really very active. It's where you'll see more of your big box type uses, that type of thing. Then you have light industrial and heavy industrial, which we're still working through all these with your staff to make sure we've got these calibrated correctly. But where it gets exciting is in the downtown. This is where we introduce the form-based codes. And you see that the format changes. It goes from a one-page to a two-page spread, and that's because we start communicating with graphics here. We want to show how that setback applies and when and where and how. And you also see a couple of new things show up here. Well, one is that you'll tend to see in downtown really high allowed residential densities. But you also see building types appear for the first time. So in your downtown area, there's two sources of regulation. There's the zoning district and then the building type within that zoning district. That's really important because historically, a building would become lots of different things over time. You know, it might start off as maybe it was a single family home, and then maybe somebody converted it into a law office. Well, it still looks like a single family home. And then they decide, actually, you know what, I'm going to turn it into a retail boutique, but it still looks like a single family home. So we're trying to embrace that organic change that can happen. That helps to encourage preservation. People aren't as tempted to knock it down to build something else when they know, oh, I can just reuse this in different ways. So you'll see these building types for each. For example, this is downtown core. We would be seeing corner commercial buildings, general commercial, mixed use, and civic for the most part. The downtown core is also where we see the most historic elements. So we tend to be a little bit more prescriptive, a little bit more limiting on these building types. But as you move out from the hard core, you'll see this downtown general. And that's where it gets a lot more flexible with the building types. You see a wide variety here, but you still see similar bulk standards to the core. We still want it to kind of match, but get a little bit more diverse and really start thinking about how to start transitioning to the surrounding neighborhood. So you see a few more residential building types show up in this. Then you get to the downtown edge, which is the area you've heard us kind of call this like the pink zone type area, where it's a little bit more lightly regulated. It has a lot of diverse building types, and is really designed to embrace what's already there, but provide some good flexibility along the way in terms of what's allowed. The second part of these are the traditional neighborhood districts. So this is getting beyond what you probably think of as your downtown area and into those surrounding neighborhoods. And there you have different environments that show up. Still very historic feeling in terms of the pattern, but not necessarily representing historic resources. So we want to embrace that pattern, embrace that culture, and make sure that we're also providing lots of options so that people that live in these neighborhoods can continue to live in them. They've got lots of ways they can, they could do an accessory dwelling or things like that to provide supplemental income, and also provide for development that's at the right scale. So you don't end up, the example I often use is East Austin, where you'll have a single family home, and then suddenly you've got a massive, 10-story mixed use building right next door. And that actually drags up that property value of that person's home, and they end up having to move before they really wanted to. Well, they usually get a good chunk of money for that property, but you want people to be able to stay in the neighborhoods that they like and love. So this is the traditional neighborhood corridor, and this is thinking about areas like Elizabeth Street as you start getting out of downtown itself. It starts having a few of those auto-oriented businesses, but it's still a very urban environment. So this helps provide for that type of circumstance. We have traditional neighborhood and mixed use. So this is like those areas in the older neighborhoods where you have these little hubs of activity. These are often correlated to a general neighborhood. So if you're like in West Brownsville, there's a little spot in West Brownsville that kind of has that mixed use vibe to it, like a little tiny downtown. So we want to provide space for those types of areas to be embraced. And then you have just the regular traditional neighborhood. This is going to be most of the residential areas, and this allows for some flexibility where you can have a house, a cottage court, some corner commercial, things like that. And that house can take different forms. It can be a duplex, it can be an office, things like that. But we tailor it to the location within that area. I'm going to pause for just a second to get a quick drink, and I'll continue. It's a big document, so I appreciate y'all going along for this ride. I know it's a little tedious.
Totally understandable.
We also have use charts. So this was one of the great adventures of the of the project, was figuring out what are the uses that you need here and how do we make them work efficiently. So we've created different categories. I think probably one of the most important things we've done is we've integrated the definition into the use chart. Usually what we see happen is somebody, will see, well, nursery and preschool. Well, what does that actually mean? Rather than sending them all the way to a definition section, the definition's right there in front of them. There's no debate about it. It helps to really understand what's going on. Makes the code a little bit more usable. It makes your use chart much longer in terms of length, but we think that the usability that we get from that offsets it. And so this is something that's probably 20 pages within the document. Then we have our building types. So this is essentially the menu of the things you see in the older parts of Brownsville. And some of these are things that we see in lots of places throughout Texas, but some of them are very unique to you. A great example that we point towards is the corner commercial building. These are also affectionately known as your bodega buildings or bakery buildings. That is something that's kind of unique to Brownsville in Texas. The only places that we've really seen stuff like this has been maybe like in Galveston, those types of areas. But each of these we've tailored to really fit you as a city. Some of these we think are going to be very useful going forward. Things like a cottage row we see as being very useful, especially to address housing affordability. We think accessory dwellings are going to be very popular, townhouses. But we also think there's some of these other buildings that are going to be growing popularity as well. Things like the flex use building, where it can be residential, it can be commercial, it can kind of hover in the in-between. For each of these types, building types, there's a one-page tear sheet that kind of tells you all the standards. What are the the building dimensions supposed to be? Things like that tell them how to design the project as they move forward. So you'll see that for each of these particular building types. We're still working on this to make sure that we don't have any misprints or a missing reference or something like that. But that's definitely been the focus throughout. And so again, it kind of continues through and they get gradually more intense as you go. And then you actually get to the things that you attach to these buildings where they meet the street. These are encroachments, things that we allow to actually jump in front of that setback line. So it'll be your balconies, what we call a forecourt area of a building, or a gallery. Galleries are kind of these buildings you have in your city that look like they're straight out of New Orleans. That's that type of design. We also provide for front porches and stoops, awnings, and storefronts, each as possible encroachments to make sure that the pedestrian feels welcomed and invited, and the building kind of talks to the street and vice versa. We do include building design provisions in this. They're pretty So the way they apply in like a commercial area is a little bit different than an industrial area. We address things like building orientation, and we provide this menu of design elements. There's a very much a theme of choose your own adventure throughout this document. Provide lots of space for creativity for a developer while still getting you a good end product that reflects your city. We address things like pedestrian shelters, articulation, how you design your roofs, and things like how much window coverage is there on a building. What we think is really neat about how we've approached this is we use an incentive-based approach to it. So basically, it's saying, developer, if you want a little bit more height, maybe some more density or more impervious cover, do a couple of things extra. Use some higher quality materials. Integrate natural environment into your design. Pull in low impact development best practices. Maybe enhance that design a little bit more in how you address the building. We found that while you can always dangle a carrot or whack with a stick, dangling the carrot seems to work better and lead to a better relationship between the city and developers, and between cities developers and the community that they're serving. Basically, people really like to see when a developer does something nice in their community, and that they in turn will reward that developer. They'll visit those businesses more, things like that. We've addressed parking within your code. We've included a good shared parking provision, and we've incentivized it to reward its use. Shared parking is always a good thing, especially as people start to rethink how we use cars. We do provide adjustments in downtown and this traditional neighborhood. These were areas that were built before cars were really the thing. And so we need to reflect that. And also, these are much more pedestrian-oriented areas. We do provide some provisions for how to break up a parking lot and things like bicycle parking, including variations on quality of the bicycle parking. We also have your landscaping standards found in this section. We're using a approach we consider that's pretty flexible, where they just need to provide for certain ratios within certain areas of the site. We place a really heavy emphasis on street trees. You are in a climate that does get hot, and one of the things that we have seen is that shade is correlated to the wealth of an area. We often see areas that tend to be lower income often lack shade. So we actually want to address that problem and bring shade to those areas. So we've provided provisions for that. We've addressed things like stormwater use. If you have a landscape island in a parking lot, saw cut the curve so that way stormwater runoff can flow into those areas. It irrigates the landscaping, but it also provides filtration for any pollutants that are running off. And then we've included things like maintenance standards. You can't just plant it once and forget it. You have to keep it alive. And then we also include alternative compliance. We want creativity here. If they're pulling in a landscape architect that wants to do something really amazing, provide the space for them to do that. We provide for your fencing and screening. We've integrated some of the stuff that you were already working on with this in terms of compatibility, but also address things like outdoor waste storage and how do you handle a fence that backs up to a collector. If you just do a wood fence, in 5 years, it'll start to fall apart. We want this to be a little bit nicer. We've also included a special provision about residential adjacency. This addresses compatibility between usually your typical neighborhoods and commercial areas or more intense development. We want people to feel like things are not, kind of closing in on them. We want this to be a provision that helps you address the not in my backyard issue, where when somebody says, I'm concerned about this use going in next door, you can say, well, we actually have these standards to help make sure that it doesn't have a negative impact on you. We've also included a provision, what we call innovative residential design. This provides for a few types of development that is really hard to prescribe standards for, but provide for really great living opportunities for people. Those include clustering and conservation subdivisions, where you're taking the amount of development that would have been allowed across a property and you're just squeezing the balloon a little. You're forcing more of that development into smaller areas and getting these larger contiguous open spaces. That helps people have that relationship with nature. We see pocket neighborhoods. These are usually arranged around a courtyard or something like that and have lots of communal features. These are very popular with empty nester households. It's a great affordability option. What a lot of people like about them is that it's kind of eyes on the street. They feel like their neighbors are paying attention. People feel very safe in these types of environments. And then traditional neighborhood design, or basically we call this development prior to World War II, where if somebody wants to do this in a new development, there's a path to do that with mixed housing types and real classic residential architecture. We've included lighting provisions in your code. This is based on dark sky compliance. So you are on a major birding corridor, both for Texas and nationally, and you've got all these great natural assets around you. So going with the dark sky approach actually helps you embrace that. Can also actually save a developer money by designing their lighting in a thoughtful way, where they're not just writing a check that's unnecessary for the cost of that. There's two paths. There's a prescriptive path and a performance path. Basically, it's the do-it-yourself approach to lighting design, or if they actually have a lighting designer involved. There's some key provisions, color temperature, for example, to avoid the blue light and the effects it has both on nature and on humans. Limiting off-site impact. There's kind of that terrible feeling when somebody's got that spotlight that shines right into your bedroom window. And then provides for standards that are easily understood and are on the current practice of lighting in the U.S. We've updated your wireless transmission code language, basically to address compliance with FCC expectations. It's pretty straightforward, encouraging co-locations, encouraging stealth facilities, making sure you're not dropping a cell tower in the middle of a residential neighborhood, the common stuff that you would see in many other cities. Most of these have gotten very standardized with this because of FCC direction. And that gets us to the supplemental standards. That's where you find tree preservation. We've done this to comply with state law changes, establish what's a protected tree, what's a heritage tree, how they're mitigated, how you handle fee and lieu, and also critical root zone protection, making sure that they're not developing around these trees in a way that causes them to die in 2 years. What's really important in this is we have tree preservation credits. So we have the stick approach where we say, don't cut down these trees or else you'll get these costs. But we also have the, hey, good job, you saved these trees. These can get credited in the following ways within your development. So making sure that we reward good behavior. Open space and trails provisions are also in this. We've got your parkland dedication language with some basic standards for what your expectations are for parkland. A fee and lieu provision for when you're better off to take the impact on parks and spend it on your existing facilities. And then trail dedication. This was something that we heard repeatedly throughout this process. So we had tied this back to your trails plan, the active plan, and your bike and trails plan. We've established your standards for shared use, side paths, and auxiliary paths. These are all terms that you see in that plan. How things are placed in a right-of-way or easement. And then it links back to your sidewalk standards as well. By pulling this in this manner, it allows you to require dedication of trails, much like you would a roadway dedication. So that's really important to building your system over time. We've also designed these provisions to be timeless. So when you adopt that new transportation plan, adopt that new sidewalk and trails plan, this is already there and is tied back to those maps, those policies, so that whenever you change those, that just rolls right along with it. But we've also provided sign standards. We gear these towards addressing sign clutter. We use that same tear sheet method where it's a one page that tells you all you need to know about the sign type involved. This is up to date with current Supreme Court rulings regarding time, place, and manner. You cannot regulate the content of a sign beyond on or off premise. And then we identified a laundry list of sign types, and that's because you have both suburban areas and downtown urban areas. So we've provided all the sign types that you would see. There's also a great provision called a master sign plan. So that's where you get a fully coordinated project. For example, you get like a large retail center up on the interstate. That master sign plan can come in really handy for consolidating signs, things like that. There are a few other elements that we've updated. Those include a flood damage prevention ordinance update that follows the current model language from the Texas Water Development Board. And we've also pulled in some best practices, with the idea being that you could participate in the community rating system that can lower home insurance rates and also help you to reduce repetitive loss when you have those hurricanes that do happen from time to time. We have stormwater management language in here that includes some minimums. That's mainly to use as a cross-reference. And what we're using for the low impact development side of this is a document called Guidance for Sustainable Stormwater Drainage on the Texas Coast for Non-Point Source Pollution and Flood Management. This was actually put together by a consortium of government agencies, nonprofits within Texas, mainly through the General Land Office. And it's being used by several cities along the Texas coast now. I think it's a natural fit for y'all. It tends to be easy to use, easy to understand. And that gets us to the next steps. So what we're doing now is we're refining this with staff a little bit more. We'll be posting a draft. We'll have hearings coming up and then adoption. So again, kind of those next steps. We've got this rapid adoption process beginning on the 19th. And then we'd love to get some feedback on this use of a alternative effective date and how to kind of onboard projects. That concludes the presentation. I know that was nearly an hour of development code excitement. I appreciate everybody going along for this ride, and I'll stop sharing my screen so we can all see everybody's smiling faces.
Well, it sure didn't feel like an hour, I don't think, but thanks a lot, Chance. I think that was pretty streamlined, as you can make it. There was a lot to cover. It's about a year's worth of work, and this is a real priority for the commission because we hear so much that it's difficult to build. There's a lot of issues, or it's confusing. I know that the existing one had kind of been an evolution over probably a couple decades at least, and it was kind of in a way a hindrance to development. So I think streamlining it, really bringing an innovative approach, which you've done, obviously, tailor it to Brownsville and downtown, which is extremely important for us. I know there was a lot of downtown development that was kind of stalled because of the code, the existing code as it is now. So I'm really, really pleased with the presentation. I think it looks great. I really personally don't have any input or any concerns at this point. I think you covered just about everything. I'll open it up to the rest of the commission and the Planning and Zoning Commission as well in case you have any questions.
I just am really grateful that this work was done. And as I've been here 10 years, this has been one of the most confusing and complicated things to deal with. So I'm so excited to see that it's streamlined and just really cleaned up from what it was. It's going to be a lot easier. We're open for business and we're open for building. And I look forward to the future and everything that's going to come from this.
Thank you for your work. You made the presentation look very easy. I choked several times and I didn't even have to say a word. So thank you for the work and the masterful presentation. And it's a need that has been a long time coming, and we will all benefit from it. Thank you.
One thing I'll comment on also is this really shows the value of subject matter experts. We could have done this possibly internally, but I think it would have been a little bit longer, and maybe we wouldn't have brought the same approach that Friesen Nichols did, having worked with several cities across the U.S. and really having the experience that they have. So I really valued your expertise, Chance, and the rest of your team. It was very impressive, and I think you attacked it right. You got it done. It's streamlined. You did it quickly, considering all the issues that were presented to you. So I really can't thank you enough.
It was worth every penny. Thank you for your work.
We really appreciate the feedback. We've enjoyed the work down there. I think I've said before, my only disappointment has been not coming down to Brownsville more because of this COVID situation. But hopefully this will clear up a little bit, hopefully sooner rather than later. And I'll be down there maybe just for fun.
Mr. Mills, do you or any of your board have any input or questions or anything?
I have some questions, but they're not for this scenario. Something I need to talk to Rick about. Like, for example, we're gonna have multiple residential zoning plans that are squeezing into basically 2 or 3, and is it going to be part of the process to designate the ones that currently exist and which one of the categories you fall into, or not? For example, I live in an A district where I have a 25-foot setback in the backyard, but the programs that they show 2 different setbacks, neither of which are 25 foot. Well, are we going to now be exempted from that for people in A, or is they going to be absorbed into another category? So I have some questions, but those are things I can talk with Rick about on this one.
Okay, very good. And I think it may also come before your board again. I think it's going to come before your board at least one more time, I believe. So,
Sure.
No, I appreciate that, Ron, because you guys know a lot of the issues that come up a lot better than us, because we usually get it if there's an issue or if somebody contests y'all's decision, right? But for the most part,
Right.
y'all take this up, and you and your board have done a really good job. So thank you all both as well for your work.
Thank you, sir.
I think it's just summed up best as it's very simple and simplified. So thank you very much for that. It eliminates a lot of headaches on us.
A lot of the years of aggravation.
Yes.
All right. Well, if there's nobody else, Chance, thanks a lot. And now you can crack your own beverage of choice, whatever that is. We won't judge.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, Mayor, we need to let Martin Vega close the planning and zoning portion of their meeting.
Very good. Martin, go ahead.
Yes, so commissioners from the Planning and Zoning Board, thank you for coming to the meeting. This concludes the portion of the work session. You may continue in the meeting for the remainder of the items as citizens of Brownsville. Your presence is no longer required for the additional items or for making any decisions. So thank you again for coming.
Okay. Thanks, Martin.
Have
Thanks,
a pleasant
everybody.
evening.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, Planning and Zoning. Great meeting. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
So it's 6:24, the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay, sorry, we had a speaker issue, but we got it fixed. Okay, we can move on to consent agenda items 1 through 2.
Okay, do we have any motions?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. To have a second.
Second. I was
We have a
like,
motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Our next item is public hearing. Public hearing and action on first reading on ordinance number 2020-1230-A, repealing and replacing in its entirety Chapter 2, Article 6, Division 2, titled Records Management. Office of the City Secretary. As you all know, the internal auditor did an audit of the records management for the city of Brownsville, and this revision of the ordinance is to address one of his findings. So this does repeal and replace in its entirety Chapter 2, Article 5, Division 2, titled Records Management. So these slides will just highlight some of the things that we did to simplify the ordinance. So it defines what is and is not a city record, and it lists additional definitions of different titles and things like electronic records, things like that. It defines the duties of the records management officer, which is the city secretary, the department directors. It designates records liaison officers, and it formally adopts and implements the Texas State Library and Archives Commission records retention schedules and all subsequent additions. The justification for this is that the city will always be following state requirements with no need to change the ordinance or retention schedules. The Records Management Committee the members were revised. We're recommending the city secretary, city attorney, finance director, enterprise applications director. And originally, when we sent the ordinance to the city attorney, we had suggested the internal auditor, who has since told us that he cannot have someone from his staff serving on that committee. So now we're suggesting that the 5th member be the director of OD and HR, which is Organizational Development and Human Resources. The records management officer will bring to the attention of the city manager any non-compliance by department directors or other city personnel. And if requested by the city manager, the records management officer would report issues of non-compliance to the city commission. The records management officer will report at least annually or as needed to the city commission on the implementation of the records management plan and compliance in each city department. And it also addresses the electronic storage of records. It will establish policies and procedures for the digitizing of local government records, including policies to ensure that all digitizing is done in accordance with the standards and procedures established in the rules of the Texas State Library and Archives Commission. It also addresses electronic messages related to city business, and it includes email, social media, text, and instant messages on both city and personal devices that deal with city business. Other items to note about the ordinance revision is that the second reading and action approval will occur at the December 1st, 2020 regular meeting if you choose to approve the revisions. But this is the first step in revising the records management program and addressing the findings from the records management audit. And that was finding number 2, update ordinance establishing records management program. When the records management ordinance is revised and approved, then the city secretary and the records management specialist will begin to develop the new records management plan, policies, and procedures, and convene the records management committee as well. And so basically this is so our records can go from the picture at the top that Mr. Zucchini took of some of the records to the pictures below, which is a well-organized, scenario of both electronic and paper records. So at this time, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them for you. You did have the ordinance revisions in your packet.
This is a public hearing. Is there anybody here on this item?
When we make the motion, do we have to include who the 5th member of the committee is, or do we just make the motion to approve?
I think what's on the agenda is the first reading and the ordinance itself.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. There's like music.
Yes, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Yes, what's on the agenda today is the first reading for the ordinance itself.
So I guess then, Commissioner, I don't think we need to then add a member at this point.
It's just to create the ordinance.
Right. Okay, it's a public hearing. Is there anybody here on this item? Okay, do I have a motion to close public hearing?
Motion to close public hearing?
We have a motion to close. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, motion passes. Do I have a motion on the item?
Motion to approve?
We have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Next on the agenda is items for individual consideration. The item was consideration and action for the approval of an interlocal agreement between the City of Brownsville and Brownsville Public Utilities Board for the Resaca in the vicinity of the City of Brownsville Ecosystem Restoration Project managed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and authorizing the city manager to execute all documents required for implementation. It is my understanding that this item is not ready and needs to be tabled, correct, Mayor?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the request is to table this item based on the fact that it did not move forward at the PUB level. So that's the request of staff.
Okay, very good. Okay, do we have a motion to table?
The table.
We have a motion to have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion on that? Okay, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, the item will be tabled. Thank you.
All right, next up is executive session. I'll read the item. Closed session pursuant to section 551.087, subsection 1, Texas Government Code regarding commercial or financial information that the City of Brownsville has received from a business prospect that the governmental body seeks to have locate, stay, or expand in and near the city, and with which the city is conducting economic development negotiations, and to deliberate financial and or other incentives to the same regarding Project Zeta, City Manager's Office.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a motion to go into executive session?
Motion to go into executive session?
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? All right, we're now in executive session. Thank you.
It is now 6:33 p.m. and we are going into executive session. Okay, it is 6:55 p.m. and we are back in regular open session. Let me just make sure we have everyone. I see the mayor, Commissioner Gowan, Commissioner Cowan, and do we have Commissioner Galansky?
I don't see her on yet.
Okay. Okay, Commissioner Galansky's on. So we now have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're back from executive session. Do we have any motions on the executive session items?
So I'd like to make a motion to authorize the city manager to enter into Chapter 380 Economic Development Agreement related to Project Zeta and to execute any pertinent documentation for its implementation.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion. Do I have a second? Motion and a second. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good night.
There being no further business to come before the commission, the meeting adjourned at 6:57 PM.